Not too long ago, for photographers, it was really easy to get higher ISO film stocks. There were film stocks like Ektar 1000 or Fuji Natura 1600, which I actually did a YouTube video on not too long ago. The only problem is they don't make those film stocks anymore, and I think when I made that video about Fuji Natura 1600, I paid about $70 for a roll of that stuff just because they don't make it anymore and it's super rare nowadays. So in today's video, what I want to do is just a little experiment for myself personally. I want to find out what the limit is of today's high ISO color film stocks, and more specifically Portra 800, which is a film stock that I use quite a bit. We're going to be testing basically the ISO limits of the film by pushing it to speeds like 1600, 3200, and if we have time, maybe even 6400. I'll explain more of the technicalities of how that works later on, but essentially what it means is you get a higher ISO film stock like Fuji Natura 1600. I did this ages ago in a YouTube video, but I just want to kind of revisit this topic and see if this is actually a practical use for film or if this is kind of just a gimmick that's really not for everyday photos. So that's what we're going to do today. Take a lot of photos, walk around this neighborhood, and see if pushing film is worth it. Let's do it. So 16,250, that seems extremely dark for this time of day. Boom, first shot. I just want to say these photos are going to suck. I just want to get good, clean sample photos of different colors, different kinds of light, so that we can see how the film is affected in a familiar looking image. Dude, this is crazy. Like, this just feels so wrong. It wants me to shoot this at f/16 at 1/125th, which I would never do because it's so dark, but I'm going to do it and we'll see if it comes out. Since this is Portra 800 and I'm shooting at 1600, what I'm doing is underexposing the film. That's what setting a higher ISO than what your film actually is tells the light meter to do. It's going to tell you to underexpose the film. And then essentially what you do after you take the images is at the lab, you tell them to overdevelop it, which means basically leave the film in the developer for a longer than recommended amount of time. And so that compensates for the underexposure that you did in camera. And what that leaves you with is a correctly exposed image because you underexposed in camera, but you overdeveloped with the chemicals. It sounds like it works really well on paper, but the film wasn't exactly made to do that. So what you usually get is color shifts, more intense grain, more contrast, and usually these effects get a lot worse the higher ISO you go. So at 1600, it might still be a pretty clean image, but as soon as we go to 3200 and 6400, we're gonna get all kinds of crazy effects, I think, on the film. So we're gonna find out if the colors are wild today or if they're actually pretty usable. But we need to start taking a lot of photos before it gets way too dark, so let's go. Let's just do this, you know, just like a basic little shot. I just gotta get over myself. 16 at 250, that's so dark. f/16 at 500. This is absolutely crazy. Oh, this is cool. Look at this, coming apart. This thing is on its last legs. All right, well, that was our first roll, and I think I'm gonna do the format of this video a little different. So instead of showing you the photo every time I take one, we're gonna shoot each roll and review the photos at each different ISO that we're pushing the film to right after. So we'll talk about the 1600 now, and we'll do the 3200 after we shoot that, and 64 after that. I just finished scanning these photos myself on Linus's Fujifilm Frontier scanner. That's why I'm sitting in his apartment. I just want to get some impressions right away, seeing the film for the first time. The first image right off the bat looks pretty clean. It is a little more contrasty than I think what you'd normally expect, but given that this was shot at like f/16 at 2/50th, at a later time in the day, I wouldn't expect there to be a lot of shadow detail. This looks pretty normal, the greens look good, the sky is blue. I would say if you didn't tell me this was pushed, I wouldn't know. And same with the next image. Again, it's clean, it's sharp, there's no crazy grain, no crazy color shifts going on. And that's kind of the theme here with this first roll with the Portra 1600. The photos look properly exposed, which is very surprising considering that I shot these at quite a dark camera setting. But if I hadn't told you, I don't think anyone would really know that these photos were pushed. They look great, the colors look good. I really like this shot in particular. I like the different pops of pink at different parts of the frame. The colors look great. Again, I think it might be slightly contrastier than what I'm used to, but that might also just be the exposure settings. I certainly exposed more for the highlight. I didn't edit these photos in Lightroom. I just wanted to give a sample as you might get back from the lab. So the scans are quite neutral and not necessarily edited the way that I like yet. I might warm these up, add some more contrast, do a little work to them, but just as a baseline, they look totally normal to me. In this one, I feel like I can kind of tell that something is off. This was the last image that I shot on the roll of Portra 1600. I think the colors just look like they're a little bit shifted. So I'm loading up the second roll of Portra 800 now, which is going to 3200 ISO. That is 2 stops above Portra 800. So basically what that means is if the scene was f8 at 1/125th normally, you could now shoot this at f/16 at 1/125th. So you gain 2 stops of light by pushing to 3200 like we're about to do. And I think this is actually gonna create some very noticeable color shifts. I think the 1600 might be like subtle enough that you can kind of color balance it out or just kind of correct the film a little bit in post. But for the 3200, I think it's gonna get a little tougher. It's gonna get a little bit grainier too. That's one of the main things that happens when you push film is the film grain starts becoming coarser. And this is especially noticeable if you're shooting on 35mm film up to 3200 ISO, which just looks silly being a film photographer. If you shoot digital a lot, you're like, yes, so what? But with the film here, that's just not something I'm used to seeing. So f/16 at 2/50th, just like at sunset, that's crazy. But supposedly, if we develop this for long enough, it'll be good. And also what you'll notice is that the more you push the film, the more the contrast goes up. And this is because your shadows are getting very little exposure, whereas your highlights are continuing to develop in the development process. And so the more you push, the contrastier the film gets. It's a beautiful day. Okay, f/16 at 500, which is just crazy. The light on this house is nice. The teal is an incredibly bold choice, but oh, this is just a beautiful scene. I've shot this so many times, but gonna have to do it again. Nice. Something very important that I just realized I forgot to do, and this is something you definitely got to be doing in the moment when you are pushing film, is to label them as you're shooting so you remember which rolls need to be pushed and how far they need to be pushed. So I'm just writing +1 on here. That's what that little piece of paper is for on the roll. And now I can just remember to tell the lab to push it to stop. Because once I throw them all in my pocket, you don't know what's what. Now for the Portra 3200, things get a little bit more interesting. Starting off with the same image that I ended the Portra 1600 on, I'll do a side-by-side comparison here. And you can see that that color shift that I was talking about before has just gotten a little bit more dramatic, I think. Like the orange colors have gone even more red and the blues are just kind of like really strong, but not necessarily in a good way. They look almost teal, I want to say. That being said though, for being 3200 ISO, I don't think it looks that bad. This photo looks pretty nice as well color-wise, but you can see that the film is just starting to lose its dynamic range when it's pushed 2 stops to 3200 ISO. Basically what happens when you push film is the contrast increases because you've exposed the film for less time, but you're developing it for longer. And what happens is the shadows end up kind of underexposed and underdeveloped, and the highlights develop for too long and too fast. And so it results in this really contrasty image, and you can see here there's almost no shadow detail in the road, and where the light is hitting the house, it's on the borderline of blown out, I would say, in some spots. This image doesn't look bad. I think for the light that it was, it's quite a pleasing look, but you can definitely tell that there is a lot more contrast in this image than you would expect from Portra 800. I think the film, once again, just was too contrasty. This was a really beautiful scene, and on normal Portra 400, I would have expected this to work very nicely, but in this case, it's just too contrasty once again. The shadows have pretty much completely lost all detail. Looking at this next image, again, the story's kind of the same. It's a lot more contrasty. The colors are a little bit shifted. There's kind of like a red undertone, I would say, almost like an expired film. But overall, if this was a last resort, I would say that's not a bad image. The last image here, you can really see that kind of red undertone, especially in the shadows where the image is a little bit underexposed. This to me looks like a film stock that was maybe 10 years expired. The blues are also quite faded in the sky. This golden light doesn't really have its nice golden quality either. It's kind of shifting a bit greenish. And overall, I would just say the image looks a bit strange. I've shot another photo of this house at a similar time that I think looks significantly better. Oh, I think the film's in your backpack, your generic everyday backpack. Another roll ready to go. And I'm not gonna forget this time. So on this one, since it was 3200 ISO, we'll write +2. The lab is gonna hate me when I come in and ask for 1 roll, pushed 1 stop, 1 roll, pushed 2 stops, 1 roll, pushed 3 stops. We're gonna go absolutely stupid now and go to 6400 ISO. This is experimental at this point. I don't think this will be usable in any capacity, but we're gonna do it anyway for the video. Going all the way to 6400. I'm gonna reshoot the same scene here just to get the exact comparison. F11 at 1/125th, and it might be hard to tell on the video, but in real life this is extremely dark for a film shot. Thing's a beaut. Hi. Now again, I did the same thing where I shot the last photo the same as the first photo on 3200 and 6400 so that we could compare them. And I think this is a really clear example of what happens when you push the film just that much further. The shadows just lose even more detail here. You can see they're darker, more contrastier, and the highlights are just completely blowing out, whereas in the previous image, the sky still retained that nice blue color. Here it's lost almost all blue. I did not color correct these any differently other than just setting the exposures correctly. The ground is completely muddy. There is kind of a nice portion in the middle of this image. If I had to use this, what I would do is probably crop in quite heavily and turn the image into something like this. Add some more contrast, try to color correct for those red shadows a little bit, which is really hard to do, and just probably embrace the contrastiness of this image, but even then, I don't think it's really working. That looks okay. It's certainly very contrasty and kind of moody looking, but it's not ideal. The tree right next to it, just not enough light at all in the shadows to make this work. At a certain point, pushing film doesn't work because the shadows just aren't getting any exposure. And if there's no exposure there, no matter how much you push, there's nothing to develop. And I think that's what's happening in the shadows here. There is just very little light hitting the film at these settings. That's very apparent in this next scan as well. I metered this correctly at 6400 ISO, but it is just so dark that even though the film is pushed 3 stops, there is not enough light here to compensate for it. This next image, I think I must have overexposed a little bit because it looks okay. I can add a little bit of contrast and brightness, but you can see that it's generally just quite muddy. It looks okay if I edit it, and it's got kind of this really textured look. The grain is getting really strong here. This might be one of my 2 favorite photos from the 3200. The other one would be this next image, which again has this really faded look to it. I think if you're pushing the 3200, you need to almost embrace this look as opposed to expecting a very clean image, because at 3200, I just don't think that will ever be possible. Again, the shadows are so dark because there was just barely any light hitting that film that the highlights look pretty good, and it's kind of a nice silhouette. This looks like some grainy Instagram photo. I personally would not be using this. I think I would much prefer to just throw my camera on a tripod and shoot the way that I normally do. This final image is completely unusable, so that is where I'm gonna leave it. I think if I had to, I would gladly push Portra 800 to 1600 ISO again. The photos do look quite nice and normal from that. 3200, if I was really in a pinch, I definitely would not be using 6400, but that's pretty much gonna wrap it up. I thought this was an interesting experiment, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. I wanna give a huge thank you to my friend Linus, who filmed the video, who let me scan on his Frontier. Finally, I want to say a huge thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Squarespace is an incredible all-in-one website building platform that you can use to build your photography portfolio online. I've been using Squarespace for so many years at this point, and they've made it so easy to get a website up and running with your photography. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, you can hit the link in my description for a 14-day free trial of Squarespace. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Willem for 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. I'll see you guys next Thursday with another video. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.